All right, everybody. Let's get started and let's talk about how to tame your microservices with Ortelius. One of my favorite foods in the whole world is the humble pizza, and it's extremely popular all over the world. The interesting thing is that it's very simple to make. You just have some cheese, dough, some toppings, and poof, there you go. A meal for the whole family. The interesting thing, though, is that it's really hard to find a very good pizza in a restaurant. And why is that? Well, if you think about it, a good pizza is actually a combination of all the ingredients that come into that pizza. The quality of those ingredients, how they've been stored, how they've been managed, how they've been put together to work as a whole. In the world of microservices, it's the same thing. The application itself delivers value, but only because it's composed of tens, if not hundreds of microservices that are loosely coupled and that work together to deliver value. So for example, if we look at here on the left-hand side, we can see a simple 5 microservice architecture that gets information from the front end through a gateway, saves data to multiple databases, uses some cache, and it even has a broker. And all of these things work together to deliver value to the user. Now, if we further take a special look at this audit microservice, we can see that it's actually receiving information through the broker about any changes that all the other services do. And it looks pretty straightforward, right? A broker, the service, and a database. But at the end of the day, if we look at the micro level, we can see that there's a lot more things that have to work properly for this service to function the way it's expected. We have to have some secret management. We have to be able to package it and deploy it. We have to have some observability and potentially many more things. So it's not just one simple library or package that's working. It's a collection of components that's actually doing the job. But also, if we now take a macro level view of our microservice, we can see that the audit service that is sitting here in the middle is actually being called by multiple applications. Not only that, those applications may be calling different versions of our microservice. So for example, the promotions app is calling version 1.0, while our orders app is calling version 1.2, and our invoicing application is calling version 2. So that adds yet another layer of complexity to managing our simple application. And so what? Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that our modern applications have a lot of moving parts to the point where it's really hard to keep all that straight in your head. When you have hundreds of microservices, keeping track of all those individual systems is more than a single person can do, which also means that when something goes wrong, or when you're trying to update a component, sometimes you may find yourself with some unpleasant surprises. What this means at the end of the day is that we need to change the way we think about software management. It's no longer about thinking about just a single application and how to manage it. It becomes how to manage multiple applications that work together as a whole and that need to be managed individually, so we know how to deploy them and how to make them work together. My name is Juan Peredo. I'm a tech consultant, architect, developer, and everything in between. And I'll be your guide as we look and navigate this change. So until now, we've been thinking we've been managing applications only. But really nowadays, what we have to look at is two panes of glass. The first one being the application view. The application view basically tries to figure out which microservices are attached to which application, what version of those microservices are used, and which are the dependencies of those microservices that are working in that application to make it work smoothly. However, the other view of this that's also as important nowadays is the microservice view. Because we need to know for a single microservice which applications it's being used on. If we want to upgrade the microservice, we need to know which applications are going to be affected. What's going to be our blast radius when we make this change, so that we can understand what applications will have to change as well, or which applications are using which version of that particular microservice. Or even if we're working with just one application, which environments contain which version of a particular microservice. So is prod the same as dev or the same as test? When something goes wrong, do we have the means to point to a particular version of a microservice so we can determine what has happened, what caused the application to fail? And all this information becomes a lot more crucial when you're managing hundreds of microservices and multiple applications. And these questions, which are very hard questions, are what Ortelius is trying to answer. And Ortelius is an open source project, is very young, and it's part of the CD Foundation. What Ortelius is trying to enable us to do is to catalog and organize our microservices in a new and novel way so that it's easier to track them and versioning them. It is trying to allow us to map three very important things that are required to manage our application. The first one being what applications are running. Second, which microservices are running in which applications. And the third one is which environment contain which microservices, and contain which applications. All those three things are required for us to have a holistic view of what's running on our environments. So how does Ortelius do this? Well, at the heart of Ortelius is what's called a domain catalog. And this is how it allows us to switch our viewpoint from an application-centric viewpoint to a domain-centric viewpoint. And each domain is a grouping of microservices and their related components. So for example, here we have our master data component, which contains our products and customers, microservices, among others. You can have a security domain, for example, that would have a user microservice, an audit microservice. You can even have an SSO microservice. But more importantly, it also contains multiple versions of our audit service so that we can track each one of them individually and understand where each one of them is deployed. Additionally, it will contain other components, like, for example, our database domain, which contains all the databases that we're using in the environment. It also contains the version numbers, so we can track that. Now, these groupings over here are something I created for our purposes, but you can group them any way you want and in any way that makes it sense for your organization. Finally, here on the bottom, we have our application domain, which relates to each one of the environments where those applications are being deployed. And this is what will allow us to group all our individual microservices to an individual application and to an individual environment. So when we're deploying an application, we will actually be pulling individual pieces from each one of those domains. Think about it as building using Lego blocks. So each one of these It's a Lego block or an ingredient that we're putting to our application. Or if you enjoy pizza, they are the ingredients that we put in our pizza. All right. So that's what the domain catalog enables us to do. Abstract the way we see our components so that we can reuse them and track them. So let's take a look at what this looks like in Ortelius. So this is Ortelius. I am going to log in. And the first place we're going to go here in our menu structure is going to be the domains. And the domains is what allows us to create our buckets or categories. And we can see that we have the same categories that we had created in our slides. So we have our master data domain, and we have our security domain where we had our audit microservice. We can also see the domain for our application. That's related to dev, test, and product environments. And that's the first step to managing applications in Ortelius, defining our buckets or categories. The next thing we're going to look at is our microservice view of the world. And we can see here, we have each one of the domains that we have defined and all the components that's associated to each one of those domains. So for example, here we have a component that is a Rango database. And we can see that there's two versions of that database that are being used in our environment. Now I can also filter to a particular domain. So for example, let's take a look at our security domain. And we can see our user service. And we can see our audit service that has three different versions. The original version 1.2, version 2. And we can see it keeps track of which microservice was derived from which one is the parent. Now, if I double click on one of them, we'll get all the information about that particular version. So here we see that our audit service is actually a container and that we are expecting to deploy it to Kubernetes. And if I go further down, zoom in a little bit so that we can take a better look, you can see that our audit service is actually being used by three applications: the invoicing application, the forecasting application, and our application version 1. And just like that, we have all the information of where our microservice is living. Additionally, we can see to what endpoints our application has been deployed or can be deployed. So in this case, it can be deployed to 4 different endpoints. And if we go even further down, we have a visualization of where the microservice has actually been deployed. If I zoom in a little bit, you can see our audit service has been deployed to a demo environment, which is composed of 2 demo servers. It's also been deployed to our production application, which is running a production cluster in Kubernetes. And finally, we have that it's been deployed to our development environment, which is running on another cluster. So this gives us a very good and easy view way to visualize where our microservice is running. Additionally, we have a list of all the applications where our microservice is running. This is in case the visualization gets too busy, and then it's just easier to look at these applications down here. And we have an audit trail that tells us when our application or microservice has been deployed and by whom. Very cool. So this gives us a holistic view of our microservice. We know where it's deployed, where it's living, which machines it's being deployed on. All that is really cool. Now we are going to look at our application view. And in here we can see the list of all our applications by domain. Right? So we see our forecasting, inventory, etc., as well as our particular application. And I can, if I filter to our application domain, you can see that we have two versions, and that version 1 has been deployed to our application production environment on 4/22, and that has been successful. That's information of the last deployment. Now, if I go into our application, we can now see that our application is actually dependent on a number of microservices and components. And we can actually zoom in. So that's our application. And we can see that it's dependent on Redis, Grafana, Postgre, web, and a number of other components that make up this application. We can also see when our application has been deployed. We can see that deployment number 141 was at 4:40 on 4/22, while deployment 140 was at 4:35. We can also see how long each one of those deployments, and because what I was playing with was very small, there is no actual time. But if this was a real application, we could see how long each one of those deployments take over time, and we could see if there's been a number of failures in our deployment. For now, it's all green. We've never failed deploying. And finally, we can see that we've deployed our application to production. If we had deployed it to other environments, they would show up over there. And we can also, once again, zoom in to see the makeup of our application. So we can see that it's been deployed to our application product environment, which is running on a production Kubernetes cluster. And we can see the individual services. And once again, we have the audit trail. So that's all really cool. And we have the second view of our system. But there's an additional view that I would like to show you that I think shows a lot of promise, which is our map view that will display for us a bird's eye view of what's running on our environments. So we can see that we have our application and our application version 1. And if I click on one of them, we can see it highlights all the dependencies, including our audit service that we had seen before is actually running in the master data and promotions application, as well as our application. I also can see our application version 1 that is sharing a lot of the microservices with our original microservices application, but that is using Audit Server 2, and Audit Server 2 is being used by invoicing and forecasting. So all of that is really good information when you're trying to quickly understand what your system looks like. Very cool. Now let's go back to our demo slides. And we can, at this point in time, you're probably thinking, well, that's a lot of information that I need to keep track on and maintain in Ortelius. And you're right, but that's where CI/CD comes to the rescue. Because Ortelius integrates with CI/CD, CI/CD, which means that all the creation and maintenance of the data required by Ortelius, like creation of new components or new versions, is automatically created as you're deploying your application to the different environments. And Ortelius provides both an internal deployment engine as well as integration with multiple external popular CI/CD solutions like Jenkins and GitLab. And I mentioned before, Ortelius is a very young project. And as such, there are very cool enhancements that are coming very quickly down the pipeline. The first one being component sets, so you can group individual components or microservices along with its dependencies as one item, so you can either deploy them as a whole, or so that you can visualize them better when you have hundreds of microservices on the screen. Other thing is the component usage summary that tells you 4 crucial elements. What service we're looking at, which versions of the service we're looking at, where each one of those versions is deployed, meaning in what application, and in what environment that service has been deployed. Additionally, we have more integrations coming down the pipeline. There's dynamic service discovery integration. And the last thing here, which I think is really cool, is integration with OpenTelemetry, which will allow us to track when something goes wrong, what change to our application could have caused the error. So for example, did I deploy version 1.4 of our service? And is that what's causing this particular error that we're seeing? Well, with Ortelius, we have enough information to try to determine that. But at the end of the day, right, we need to change the way we manage applications. It's no longer enough to manage just at application level. We have to come down one level to the microservices themselves so that we can version them and manage them properly. And in order to do this, it's crucial to have a domain catalog that allows us to abstract our applications into something that's more manageable and that we can easily keep track of. And it's important to understand that automation plays a crucial role maintaining and upkeeping that domain catalog, just like it plays a crucial role actually deploying the application. And all of this enhances collaboration, allowing teams to understand what services are running, not only on their own applications, but within the context of the whole environment. And finally, it allows us to control the blast radius when we're deploying a new version of our microservice. What could go wrong? What applications need to change? All of that is very important to understand when you're having and using a microservices application. At the end of the day, these 5 items are what allow us to tame our microservices. Any questions? Thank you. Hello, everybody. All right. Well, if anybody has additional questions, I know we've been answering questions on the chat. If anybody wanted to jump in and share their video and ask questions, that'd be great. If not, we've seen a lot of good questions on the chat, and that shows that this is a real problem that we're facing once we move to a microservices based architecture. Let's see. What do I need to do as a developer to inform Ortelius about what endpoints are available? Well, there's several ways that you can determine and let Ortelius know. The first thing, and it's something that, for example, you could do the first time around, and you could enter those things manually into Ortelius. However, as your system grows bigger and bigger, that's probably not the best option. The second way to do this is through integration with the CI/CD tools. We saw one of the slides showed the integrations that we have, and there's more that are coming. And the third one is using service discovery. So one of the things that the team, I believe, is working on is integrating with service mesh, so that we can interrogate the service mesh to see what traffic is coming through the service mesh, and figure out which services are talking to each other, and that way we can populate Ortelius. All right. Any other questions? Nope. All right. How would I know if? All right. Looks. I'm glad you did, Jack. Yep, no problem. Yeah. What do you mean, Brian? This system makes an improvement? Yeah. Oh, thank you, Tracy. Hey, Brian.
Yes. So I implement the system, Ortelius. It's not a trivial thing to install and maintain. What problem? How would I perceive in my organization that Ortelius made a difference?
How would you perceive if Ortelius made a difference?
Yes. How would I know that it was worth all the effort?
Well, it all comes down to information, right? So information is the most precious thing you can have. So the ability to be able to track what has happened or what error has occurred in your application because you made a particular change is precious, right? So the ability to foresee potential issues that you're going to be adding to your system because you made a change to a particular microservice is very important, and it's very good information to have. And it's something that most people, when they start working with microservices, they don't realize how interrelated these things are at the end of the day. Yes, they're built to be independent, but they're part of a whole, right, of a bigger picture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if I'm doing Datadog and I'm doing log analysis, then I'm also doing Istio, and Prometheus. What additional value would Ortelius add to my organization?
So the question would be, do you want to react to a problem or do you want to prevent a problem? Prometheus, Datadog, those are reactive tools. They're telling you that something has gone wrong.
Yeah, Ortelius is all about trying to prevent the problem before it happens, rather than trying to react to the problem.
So Ortelius will tell me this new microservice deployment has happened,
or is about to happen, or you want to know what happens if I deploy this new version. What am I going to affect? What's my blast radius? What other services am I going to be potentially causing problems to?
Okay, so that would say I'm going to update. I'm adding a new endpoint, or I'm adding a new version of this thing with a new endpoint, and people are consuming the old endpoint, and if they switch to my new one, these are the people that may be affected. So that means I would need to test their application interaction with my microservice. Does that mean I'm blocked from deploying because now I know that they may consume a new version of the microservice?
It means that now you know that before you deploy your new version, and more importantly, before you remove the old version, you have to talk to some people and make sure that they understand that there's going to be consequences to the new release, right? So your team, let's say your billing team, the last thing you want to do is stop billing because you change your microservice that does authentication, right?
Right.
And you want
as long as I maintain a compatibility with the old API, that shouldn't happen. It would only happen if they switch to the new API.
True. However, how do you know when you can turn off the old API? And how do you know that they've actually moved? How do you know to tell them that they need to move? Right?
Well, yeah, go ahead. I guess one thing is I could maintain the old API forever, or I could also have a deprecation notice. And it seems I don't like the idea of having to keep track of who's consuming my API.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe I need to be more expansive in my ideas.
Well, it comes down to whether you want to react to somebody failing or be more proactive, right? So yes, it's you can set up your environment so that you can react right away when something's failing, or you can make it so that you can proactively tell people that this is going to fail unless you do X, Y, Z. Right.
I guess I could target, I could always Slack message to everybody in engineering, but I also could, I guess with Ortelius, I would be able to know deterministically who is consuming my API at this point, and be able to specifically reach out to them.
Yep.
I guess if I'm the consuming service, I would be able to know that the new version of the API is there, and I could test my application to use it, and I wouldn't necessarily have to contact them about the new API version. I would just see it, and I'd be able to say, all right, I'm going to upgrade to the new API version.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually could reduce the amount of communication necessary by making it more programmatic.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Ortelius is trying to do, is making sure that you don't have to maintain all this information yourself, right? Once you enter the initial set of, this is my new microservice, Ortelius is trying to actually automate all that stuff for you, right? So that by integrating with your CI/CD and with your service mesh, at the end of the day, it's trying to make sure that all that information is always up to date without you having to go in and manually enter the information, so that you can go into Ortelius and just determine that your blast radius without you having to do any additional work.
Okay, and two more things about that is,
mm-hmm.
One is if I make a new endpoint available, a new mm-hmm. version of the API.
Yep.
How do I tell Ortelius that new endpoint is available?
Well, as we just mentioned, right? So you could enter it manually because it's a new API. You can say, okay, this is my new service. I'm putting it out there.
Is there an API to Ortelius? I could have I guess I could have some sort of a YAML that my application would include to say, publish to Ortelius that here's my API versions available.
Well, for example, if you were, using Jenkins, right, as your CI/CD tool, in Jenkins you can have a task that says publish to Ortelius this information, and that would populate the information for you in Jenkins.
Would I just do a post to Ortelius with the information for my service? You
could do a post, right? But I think if you start doing that, then there's manual things that you have to do. But in in your CI/CD tool, if there's an integration with your CI/CD tool, it's as easy as having a task that says, let Ortelius know that this has changed.
Well, I mean, the way I'm going to do it is doing a HTTP post to Ortelius saying, here's my payload for defining what my endpoints are.
You could.
Is that available?
I think it is. I'm not 100% positive. I don't know if there's one available right now that you can access directly. I know that there's tools like Jenkins that will post into it. So I'm assuming if it's not available, it can be readily made available. But I don't know. I won't guarantee that that's there.
If I use Swagger, can I use Swagger to automate this also?
I don't know, frankly. I don't know.
Okay. Hey.
I don't know.
Right.
But
well,
the good thing is Ortelius is a new project. It's very young.
All right.
And if you join the Discord channel,
I did. Yeah.
Oh, you did. Excellent. Yeah, they're extremely helpful. It's a very open community. I really enjoy even just hanging out there. It's really cool.
They're working on Open Swagger.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Awesome.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everybody.